This is a great time of year, and it's a great week. And what I'd like to do today is to talk about, when God doesn't show up. And I'm sure there's been a lot of situations that God's been invited to that He didn't show up on time. And I always get this from people, like, where was God when I needed it? When I needed this, And you're not alone when you ask that question. In fact, when you start to read through the Bible, you realize that's one of the biggest questions. You read Psalm 10, verse 1. He says, God, why are you hiding when I need you most? It's a good question. And it's if you don't mind, throughout the message today, I might push on the version of God that you cataloged in your head as a child, if I can. But if you hang in there and we get to the end, you might say, oh yeah, that might make more sense. Do you remember when Jesus is on the cross and he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, not only do you have Jesus saying this on the cross, it's kind of like, God, where are you, kind of at a really important time. But this also is Jesus quoting from Psalms. This one's Psalm 22, word for word. My God, why have you forsaken me? And what I would like to suggest is maybe what we do is we look for God in all the wrong places. Let's do a story. This is from 1 Kings 19. For whatever reason, we do bedtime stories with Charlie, and she's really into the prophet Elijah and Elisha. So this is from the prophet Elijah. He's threatened with his life, and he takes off running. And it says that he ran for his life. So some of you know this incredible feeling like everything's on the line here. And it says he ran and he finds himself out in the desert and he sat under a broom tree and he prayed that he would die. I just want to die. So you're getting the picture that this is a guy that has an incredibly low point in his life. Somebody's chasing him, trying to kill him. He's running for his life. He runs to the desert. He's under a tree. He just thinks, this is it. Take my life, he says. Then he laid down under the tree and he fell asleep. I like this. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. You ever try to help somebody that's really low? Sometimes you just got to get them to eat. You know what I'm talking about? Like, hey, let's just start with this. True, right? I'm down. I'm defeated. I don't even think I can eat. And an angel comes into your life. Good person says, here, let's just go get something to eat. I remember when my dad died. You have this overwhelming. It was completely unexpected. It was an accident, a trucking accident, and your head's just spinning. And his friend came. And he just sort of drove me around to all the dumb stuff that you have to do. Because, because of pastoring, I'm obviously around families going through this funeral stage all the time, but no one's prepared for it. I mean, even if you're prepared for someone to die, like they had a long illness, very few people are prepared for the amount of things you have to do. Like, I got to contact this person. I got to get someone to do this, and the service, and the funeral director, and cremate or buried, and where buried, and transport of this, and it's like you open a little business for like 2 weeks. It's a lot of work, and people are overwhelmed. So he comes in, and he brings his car, and he just starts driving me wherever we got to go. I'm just a driver. Could I ever forget that? A friend that came. I'm not here to tell you anything. I'm not here to give you theological advice as to why your dad was killed in a trucking accident. I'm just here to drive. And then what he would do every once in a while, he's like, we need to eat. I still remember pulling into Burger King and him making my grandpa eat. My grandpa, unfortunately, witnessed my dad's losing his life. So you're watching your child killed like that. My grandpa was in the car too. My grandpa's real quiet, and never asks for anything for himself. That's just not him. And so he's like, do you want some, to eat? He's taking the orders, and my grandpa says no. And he orders some food anyway. You got to eat. Angel says, get up and eat. And he looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread and baked over hot coals and a jar of water. Huh? You ever had an angel in your life? I pray you have. Someone that just comes and brings you food when you need it the most. And the angel came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat. So he got up and he ate and he drank, and he was strengthened by that food, and he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, which is the mountain of God. Well known. This was the place people went to meet God, the mountain of God. Where was he running to for his life? He was running to God. I'll go to the mountain of God. I mean, isn't that what you do? When it all breaks loose, come on. I mean, you've already confessed to me. Some of you are like, I know I haven't been to church in 3 years, but this happened. That's okay. You run to God, right? You run to God. And he's running. He gets to the mountain of God. And there, this is where I'm going to get help and relief. And the word of the Lord came to him in the cave, the mountain of God. What are you doing here, Elijah? That's a good question. What are you doing here? Well, what do you mean, what am I doing here? I'm running for my life? Talk to you? I got a question for you. What are you doing here? No, I mean, I know it's Sunday. Besides that, what the heck are you doing here? Why are you here? That's a good question. What are you looking for? God says to him, what are you doing, Elijah? And he says, well, I've been doing your work out there, and everybody's rejecting it. It's all falling apart. You ever needed to just unload? Anybody? I guess. He just starts unloading on God. It's a whole thing. It's a mess. And I'm the only one left. He's like, I'm the only one left serving you. And now they're trying to kill me. Now, we're going to learn later in the story that God's going to correct the record, because he's not the only one left. But you ever start on the pity party train, anybody? I mean, it's fun. You get yourself some wine and cheese, the music. You just start pitying. I mean, come on. Who's ever been on the pity party train? It's just like, oh, it's so good. You try to get people to come on board and look at you crying, And it's, I mean, I'm not saying it's been easy, but God's like, okay. And the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. I think he went to the mountain of God because he wanted to meet with God. This is a mess. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart, shattered the rocks. There's this powerful wind. But the Lord was not in the wind. See, when we go looking for God, we look in these powerful things, don't we? Then it says the Lord wasn't there, but then there was an earthquake, and it shook the mountain. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face, and he went out, and the voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Sounds like a rhetorical question, huh? Like if you sent your kids out to do the chores and they come back in 5 minutes and you go, "What are you doing here?" Because we all know they ain't done. What are you doing here? Why are you here? He said, I've told you, I'm zealous, and he repeats the whole thing all over again. And God says to him, go back the way you came. Sometimes we're looking for God in all the wrong places. And that's what we want to talk about today. Oftentimes we feel like I got to get to the mountain, or I got to get to the church, or I want to get somewhere so I can be with God. And God's saying, you know what? Actually, what you need to do is go back where you came from. I think what happens as human nature is when we think of God, we think God's going to come to me in some big, dramatic, visible action. I mean, if you ever sit down with a colleague and say, "Well, God spoke to me last night," you're like, "Whoa, how?" I mean, what we think of is the more dramatic, the more godlike it is. The more powerful, the more terrifying, the more shaking, the more godlike it is. And what we learn in this story is that God wasn't in the wind or the earthquake or the fire, but God was in this whisper. You know, one of the greatest things that could ever happen in your life is you could learn to pay attention to the whisper. Think about what I'm saying. Because a lot of you shushed the whisper a long time ago. And then you got the thunder. All right. So my team over here today. All right, so the whisper, honey, can you put your things away? Can't hear you, Mom. Can't hear you. Right? Honey, can you put your things away? Be right there. No intention. You with me? I will leave the next sentence out because it's church. Get your stuff. Anybody with me? The volume went up here. No. Why? I got to get your attention now. Where's God? See, the thing is, we've always associated God with the thunder, but it's clear here that God's in this still small voice. I think one of the things that we underappreciate is how active God is in your every single day life. These little whispers all the time. Oftentimes people want God to do some miraculous big answer to prayer. And it doesn't work out, and so they feel like the person in the Psalms says, God, where were you? I mean, just think about this. I was thinking about this, like sipping a cup of coffee this morning, just so nicely. I mean, when you think about it, like, honestly, what's better than a cup of coffee in the morning? I mean, just think about it, like whatever else is going on in the world, it's just like, and while I was sipping on the coffee, there were over 300 billion stars swirling around in our Milky Way galaxy. 300 billion in our Milky Way. Can you get that? And my coffee didn't even rattle. 300 billion stars. I mean, I don't know if you know, in the Milky Way, we live out in the burbs. I mean, this is true, right? What do they say, like 23 million light years from the center of town? of that galaxy that we live in is one of 300 billion to 2 trillion galaxies. And yet you can walk out on Thursday and just catch a slowly drifting snowflake on your tongue. God, could you do a miracle, please? I think it was Albert Einstein said, you have to look at life either there's no miracles or the whole thing's a miracle. And if you chose to wake up in the morning and say the whole thing is a miracle, the whole thing, that's the whisper. The whole thing's a miracle. Now, oftentimes we get our Bible through little doses, Sunday sermons, the pastor does a verse, or Sunday school, you memorize one, or you learn a Bible story. But one of the things that we often are not afforded is to look at the Bible as a whole. Like, how does the whole thing fit together? Could you permit me 2 or 3 minutes? Yeah. So, if you take a step back, they say sometimes we miss the forest for the... so sometimes we miss the Bible for the verse. And we don't see what in the world's going on here. So just for a minute, when God starts, he creates Adam and Eve, and he pretty much does everything for them. And if you notice, like, he even makes clothes for them. And then, things progress, and you go from that to Noah, and he gives Noah a lot of instruction, and Noah does a lot more stuff. He builds an ark, But by the time you get down to Abraham, like his story is much more complicated, much more involved, and he argues a little bit with God. And by the time you get all the way down to the end of our Old Testament, it's almost silence. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but there's the book of Esther, God's not even mentioned. That's interesting. If you go from Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning, God. Boom, God did this, God did that, God did this, God did that. And you get all the way down to Esther, it's not even mentioned. Some of you didn't know that. Why would they do that? Why wouldn't you talk about God? What's wrong with these people? How did it get in the Bible? A secular book in the Bible. Back over here. A secular book in the Bible. What the heck's going on here? I think the idea was you were supposed to read between the lines. If you read the story of Esther, you were supposed to read between the lines that God was doing this all along behind the scenes. When he says to Esther, perhaps you've been brought here for such a time as this. What's the code? God did this for you, lady. Anybody ever get a new job? Huh? You're walking around like you're the stuff. Or, what? God did this for me. Now, there's a funny line, and that's part what we need to talk about today, because where's the line between what we did and what God did? I mean, this is for sure we're talking about, because for one of the things is it makes some Christians really pathetic. Early pathetic. Oh, I'm just praying about it. Just in bed praying about it. My next job. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Honey, call the church for prayer. Call the church. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. No, don't say it doesn't happen. I'm just waiting for God. I'm just waiting on the Lord. Oh man, you go to enough church and you can get all these like cool phrases. Just waiting on the Lord. No, I believe in waiting on the Lord, by the way. But not in your bed till 2:30 in the afternoon when you're trying to get a job. Huh? You better go wait on some tables. Get up, get out of bed, get doing something. I'm just waiting on God to come through. How many know God could come through if you got doing something? So one of the extremes that happens is what you see if you took a zoom out from the Bible story as a whole, is it starts with God doing pretty much everything to God totally empowering someone else. That's kind of how we grow up, isn't it? I mean, when you grow up, like, anybody got a newborn in the house lately? You do everything. And I mean, what? What's the one thing a parent of a newborn needs more than anything else? Sleep. Please, God, I just want to sleep. There's no sleeping. Because you do everything. 24/7, you everything. And everybody's just like, just hang on for a couple of months. And then they're 24 and you're like, dear God, it's everything but the diaper. You know, no, it's not that bad usually, but anyway, we'll talk about that in a few weeks. It moves away from that. It's not quite as much, not quite as much, not quite as much. The interesting thing is if you go to the New Testament, the pattern repeats itself. I don't know if you've ever followed this, but, Jesus, he's doing a lot of cool stuff. Healing people, miracles, all kinds of stuff, but he calls this group around him. And when you get to the end of John's gospel, some really amazing things happen. Jesus says them, he gathers them together. This is the very end. Now, the resurrection, Jesus is gathering the disciples, and he says, now, as the Father has sent me, so I, what? Send you. And it says, and he breathed on them, and they received the Spirit. It starts with Jesus doing a lot of the stuff, and then halfway through, I don't know if you've ever followed the Gospels, but he kind of empowers them. Now, you guys go out and do some of that stuff. And by the very end, it says in Acts chapter 1, verse 9, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They couldn't see him anymore. And he said, now go. Can I just be really honest? The greatest chance of God showing up in someone's life today, he's probably going to be wearing Carhartts. You, filled with God's Spirit, with your Levi's, that's what it means for God to show up in somebody else's life. Don't think I'm that far wrong, because I think what happened to us is we got schooled on it always needs to be like this direct line from God. But then Jesus empowered these guys, and then later on Paul said, this is the body of. Now that's a peculiar phrase, because if he's now hidden from our sight and he's gone, then how is Christ touching the world? Evidently it's through you. And what? Now, I'm not saying he can't do a workaround. Of course he can do a workaround. But here's the plan. He breathed on them. He said, as the Father sent me, so I am sending what? You. You are the answer to someone's prayers. You. When you show up like that, you're the answer. And by the way, this is really good, because you know what? When God made Adam and Eve in the beginning, and it says God made in his image, and then he gave them dominion. He told them to rule over all the stuff of the earth, to sort of take care of it. He sort of left his stuff in our hands. Jesus leaves his Spirit in the disciples. You know why? Because that's what we were created to do. You and I were created to do these things, to do God's work in the world. Unfortunately, okay, use my words carefully. But unfortunately, a lot of what gets painted as Christianity today is a bunch of people that sit around and ask God to do things for them. Now, I already said we have a prayer team now. We pray, and I'm going to get to that. I like the quote that says, pray like it all depends on God and work like it all depends on you. I mean, that'll get you somewhere in life. But if we start to paint this idea that God's main job is to sit there somewhere and take requests, we missed the whole story. The whole story, it's right here. He breathed on them, received the Spirit. Do you know how much power is inside of you? I don't think a lot of you do. I don't think you know what kind of power is inside of you, and I don't think you are aware of the calling that is in front of you. Anybody ever read Psalm 8 where it says he made them a little lower than gods? What the heck does that mean? That never gets quoted in church. Or in John chapter 9 when Jesus said, you are gods. Never heard that quoted in church. Ever. Who's doing God's work in the world? You know, some of my favorite characters in the Bible, in the Old Testament, I think it's Exodus. It's like around Exodus 32. But it's the craftsman. And I love it because it makes me think of my grandpa and it makes me think of my dad, you know, because a lot of times what people think is like, well, Chris does God's work. And it's just so misguided. I mean, I understand in today's modern context why people talk like that, but it's so misguided. Like grandpa did God's work. The first people that were said to be filled with the Spirit of God were these men, and they were craftsmen, and they built the tabernacle. Wouldn't it be great if all of our tradesmen and tradeswomen, for that matter, in this church believed they were doing God's work every time they got up? Doing God's work. In certain circles, you know, certain circles, I get called reverend. I don't ask for it or insist on it, but it just happens. People learn and things. It's reverend, and I was looking around for somebody, and they're talking to me. And it's an interesting title because it's like revered one. Certainly not one that I think I deserve of any sort, but when I think if we really realize that what we're doing is revered work. And I see my buddy Dave here. He gets up on the roof when it rains here at Orchard Grove. No one sees him. Sometimes it's snowing and it's icy. He's up there climbing or fixing the leak because it leaked over here in Kids World. It's 52,000 square feet of flat roof. He's up there doing God's work. Another leak, Dave. This week, a buddy of mine, Doug, comes in. He fixed a pump somewhere in that godforsaken, they call it a boiler room. It looks like a behemoth in there. There's something, there's pipes and things, wires and stuff going everywhere. And he went in there and fixed it. Now the heat works. My buddy Joe, the day after he retired, he comes in to me, day after retired, Easter this year. I got to do some work. What do you need? I said, we got a list. He's been here almost every day since then, fixing things around this very tired building, doing God's work, answering prayers. Now you could say, well, God could do. He could send an angel in there with a wrench and, take the coupler off and, yeah, could. Never heard that happening before. But usually the way God answers prayer is through you and me. We got to get a hold of this. It would change the whole footing of what we think it's all about. And by the way, if you're a non-doer, this is for you. Because God wants you to do. Do you know what's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the story of Jesus' life? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. What's the next one? After Jesus puts it in their hands, you know what the book is titled? The book of Acts, like action, like get out of bed. You call it the book of get out of bed. No, this is important stuff because, we're dealing with all these problems in our society, but why are we dealing with all these problems? Because we had too much sitting around. Oh, wait till the emails come this week. We got way too much sitting around. I mean, I grew up like old school, but we just weren't allowed to just sit around. Anybody grew up in my generation, like, I'm going to give you something to do. I don't know, but they can't because they're depressed. Is it they can't because they're depressed, or is it because they're not doing it that they're depressed? You ought to look that one up. But they're dealing with all these issues. And a friend told me this week, I loved it. He said, he's got a young son who's, just forging into the world, that young adult thing. And I loved it. He said, my son was asking, well, I don't know what's the right thing to do. And I could be doing this and I could be doing that. And I call it option overload, which is its own anxiety, really. And he goes, just do the next right thing. Perfect answer. I'm waiting for God. I'm waiting for a hurricane. I'm waiting for this booming voice, this big blinding light to tell me what to do. How about just do the next right thing right in front of you, like right here? That's the biggest problem is we're making it way bigger than it needs to be. And just there's that still small voice like, how about just get up, go to work? When you're doing God's work, when you're doing whatever you can a little bit better. Make yourself a little bit better. Can you be a little bit better towards your wife? No, I just went for grumpy, kind of staying there. Come on, man. No, I just settled on grumpy. That's what my dad did, and it worked out okay. They just never talked to each other. I mean, is that it? Or can you get a little better? Can you work on that skill? Yeah, you can get better. Can you do a little better? Can you make life a little bit bigger than you? So that now it's not just me, but what about the other people around me? Part of the suffering, can I be really honest? Part of the suffering of our generation is its selfishness. Self-centeredness. It really is. Because then all you think about is yourself. And when all you think about is yourself, the next thing is absolute misery. Guarantee. I take it from a 5-year-old. She woke up this morning thinking about herself. Right? Anybody with me? Came up with a little, now she's a pretty happy kid. Really, really happy kid. But she had a little pout face on. What's the face for? What did she say? Well, Dad, I'm just concerned about you. You got so much on your head. You got to get that message ready for Sunday. You got that whole flock to take care of. Heck no. The pout face is related to what? She wanted to put up the Christmas tree yesterday, so we put up the Christmas tree, and then she wanted to do presents, right? And you know where this is going, right? She's like, I was like, it's a long way away, and I finally relented. I'm like, okay, we can put up the tree. Fine, put up the tree. Next thing you know, we want to put presents under there. She's a little 5-year-old, manipulator. She goes, Dad, I'll just get a present for you. There's 2 presents under there for me. Found boxes in the garage. God knows what's in them. There's bows on them. And then she gets a little, what? Stick the lip out because there's none for her under there. What do? Okay, fine. Not open it till Christmas. They put $1 in a box, so don't tell her. And there it is. As soon as she wakes up this morning, what's she thinking about? What's wrong with us? We're just thinking about ourselves too much. Go back to the beginning. He made in the image of God. Psalm 8, a little lower than God. You're like this far away. That's deep. The power that's inside of you and the project that's in front of you drops us on this planet and says, go get him. Make it amazing. You know, the other day I was listening to an interview with Elon Musk, and they were talking about, the guy's like, I'm trying to understand Elon Musk. Like, the guy wants to go to Mars. What the heck? Who wants to live on Mars? Have you ever seen the movie with, what was that, Matt Damon or something? The heck, I don't want to live there. Is anybody? Like, but he's talking about, he's like, well, yeah, some people are going to die setting it all up for sure. That's what he said. He's like, but you know, that's how people are. Some people will do it. He's dead set on it. But I mean, if you think about, like, if you could go there and it'd be like a quick trip, you know, like a couple hours, and then they had like a Starbucks where they had oxygen, and just a couple other small things, maybe a nice beach, I'd go. But I mean, it's rough sledding there, but God sets us on this planet, this one, with the trees, the beauty. He says, have at it. Make it beautiful. Wow, what an opportunity. You know what we should wake up every single day and say? What an opportunity. I can't believe we get to do this. I can't believe it. You know, our problem always comes in about 5 emails in. Am I right? Well, the 5th email, you're like, I can't take it more. Can't take it anymore, right? You get buried. Anybody get buried? Buried in the weeds, buried in the noise. You got to step away. He asked us to run this place. And then Jesus says, the Father sent me, now go on. I mean, every single day you can wake up and go, I wonder what Jesus would do in my shoes today. That'd be fun. Bless, to heal, to restore. Make something better. Make something beautiful. One thing you could say for sure about our world is it's beautiful. I have a real trouble with the modern day version of heaven. I mean, I get the memes and the jokes, and I get all the pearly gates, Peter. I get the jokes, but I don't get the people that really passed it, because it's like, it was some version of this to me growing up. It was like, well, I mean, and it was definitely better than the other alternative. Is that fair? But let's just be honest. Like, I was like a 15-year-old kid, and I was new at the church, and I was way into church. But whenever I got the heaven bill, 15-year-old boy, like, going to heaven and like, well, what do we do there? Like, they got streets of gold. You're like, anything else? Like fast cars, motorcycle, you know, what do you drive on them? And they're like, well, it's just the angels everywhere and everybody. And then this is what I was told. We gather around and we worship forever Anybody ever been to a long church service? Anybody? That's exactly what's going on in my mind. I'm like, dear God, no, that's heaven? No, seriously. Okay, well, what do you think it's going to be like? You know, like as a 15-year-old boy, I'm thinking, ah. And I loved church, but like, it's over, bro, it's over. Time to shut her down. I couldn't relate that, but it makes you think. And I've never connected with that version. Since then, I've learned there's a different version, but I did 8 weeks on it a while ago. I don't have time now. 8 weeks is a long time. But it has something to do with you still doing your thing. You still doing your thing. You doing your thing is an important thing. That's where you feel the presence of God. Wouldn't it be neat if next time you have this big dramatic prayer, God just says to you, what are you doing here? Like he said to Elijah, what are you doing here? Get back the way you came. Can I say it this way? Can I paraphrase? Get back in the game. Get back in the game. I'm all for prayer. I think it's a beautiful and rightful place, and I think prayer is a lot more of us surrendering to God than us bringing our Christmas wish list personally. We can do that another week. But I think to a lot of them, God's just saying to us, you need to get back in the game. Do you know what I put inside of you? If nothing else, and you left here today and you realize that you are a temple of God's Spirit. If that ever really hit you, if that ever woke you up, you would never be the same. You're the temple of God's Spirit. You. Crusty, cantankerous you. But still you. Let's shine it up. Let's go out there and do it. Went from Jesus to the actions of the apostles, the followers, the sent one. You know what the word apostle means? Do you know what it means? Sent one. As the Father sent me, so I am sending you. The actions of the... So we're going to pray. I'm going to close in prayer, but then when we walk out, we're all going to go be an answer to somebody's prayer this week. Is that? Be an answer to somebody's prayer. That's your deal. That's your deal. Let's stand together.